I used to think there was nothing in this world I wouldn't do for my daughter. That belief was stitched into my bones from the moment I first held her in the hospital, swaddled and squinting at the bright lights like she already hated how loud the world was. Her name was Claire, and she became the reason I worked late nights, skipped vacations, and built my company from scratch. I owned a mid-sized logistics firm. Nothing flashy, but solid and dependable, just like I tried to be. After the divorce, I doubled down on building both the business and our bond. Her mother, Vanessa, was beautiful, yes, but ruthless. She and I fell apart long before the papers were signed. It didn't take long for her to find someone new. Robert. Tall, polished, always wearing that rehearsed smile. I knew his type, and yet I said nothing. I let Claire make her own judgments. I figured if I led with generosity, she'd see for herself who really stood in her corner. Raising Claire solo for most of her teenage years was both the hardest and most rewarding thing I've ever done. She had her moods, who didn't at 16, but she never lacked for anything. I paid for private school, her first car, even a semester abroad when she got curious about Italy. When she graduated, I handed her the keys to the company, not just symbolically, but officially. She was named CEO at 24. Some people on the board grumbled. I brushed it off. I wanted to believe in her, to give her a head start no one gave me. I had built the company so she'd never have to struggle the way I had. My entire legacy was wrapped up in her future, and at the time, it felt like the right move. But over the years, I noticed a shift. She started mimicking Vanessa, sharp in her language, strategic in her kindness, calculating in ways that made me uneasy. Still, I kept giving. Maybe too much. It all came to a head when she announced her engagement. I won't lie, I didn't like the guy. Austin was ambitious, smooth-talking, and far too interested in what my company could do for him. Claire brushed off my concerns. "He's not trying to use me, Dad," she said, laughing like I was paranoid. "He just wants to build something with me." I saw the same spark in his eyes that Vanessa had when she met me. Only this time, I knew better. Still, I paid for the wedding. I booked them a honeymoon in the Maldives, 5-star everything. I even offered to renovate the beach house in San Clemente for their future family. It was the place Claire used to run around barefoot in summers, chasing the waves until sunset. It meant something. It was mine. But I could see her looking at it differently now. Not with nostalgia, but calculation. Like it was a prize she just hadn't claimed yet. 2 weeks before the wedding, Vanessa started calling more often. She'd been cordial over the years, but now she was suddenly checking in, dropping hints about family legacies and how some assets belonged to the next generation. I ignored her at first. Then, Claire began echoing the same lines. "You don't even use the beach house anymore, Dad. It's just sitting there. Wouldn't it make more sense for us to take it over? Start our life there?" I didn't respond right away. I felt something shift in my gut. That house wasn't just a structure. It was a symbol of everything I'd worked for and everything I had refused to give up in the divorce. The idea of signing it away felt like tearing out a piece of myself. But I didn't want to fight. I told her we could talk about it after the honeymoon. That wasn't good enough for her. And I should have known. It wasn't her idea. It was Vanessa's. The day before the wedding, we had a rehearsal dinner. Everyone was smiling, drinking wine, clapping after toasts. But Claire kept looking at me across the table like there was something unspoken between us. I tried to shake it off, convinced myself I was being dramatic. But I should have trusted that feeling. When she hugged me goodnight, she whispered, "Don't forget what we talked about." I didn't respond. I just patted her back and walked away, the wine suddenly bitter in my mouth. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, its blades spinning in slow, methodical betrayal. I kept asking myself, where did I go wrong? Was it when I handed her too much too soon? Was it when I failed to draw a line between love and loyalty? I had taught her how to lead a company, but I hadn't taught her what it meant to honor a family. The morning of the wedding, I woke up before sunrise and drove to the beach house. I stood on the deck, coffee in hand, watching the ocean break against the shore. I remembered Claire at 5, building sandcastles, laughing when the tide washed them away. That version of her was gone now, replaced by someone who saw the world through a lens of leverage. And yet, I still loved her. That was the hardest part. Love doesn't die just because someone disappoints you. It festers, morphs into something heavier. I sat there for hours, wondering if she would really go through with it, really force me to choose between being her father or being her pawn. Deep down, I think I knew the answer. She wasn't bluffing. She never bluffed. Not anymore. And so, as the sun climbed higher, I got back in the car and drove toward the wedding venue, bracing for a moment I couldn't quite imagine, but would never forget. There was a silence that hung in the bridal suite like stale perfume, sweet, oppressive, and impossible to ignore. I walked in just 20 minutes before the ceremony, after a short conversation with the wedding coordinator and a forced smile to some distant cousin I hadn't seen since Claire was in braces. She sat in front of a vanity mirror, radiant in a silk robe, surrounded by her bridesmaids, laughing a little too loud at something on someone's phone. But when she saw me, the room quieted. One by one, the women excused themselves, drifting out with fake smiles and anxious glances. It was just her and me then, father and daughter, sharing a silence we hadn't known since she was 12 and asked if her mom was ever coming back home. Claire stood up slowly and walked to me, her robe swishing gently with each step. "Did you bring it?" she asked, her voice low but firm. I blinked, not because I didn't know what she meant, but because I couldn't believe she had the gall to ask me again. Here, now, minutes before she was supposed to walk down the aisle. "Claire," I said, my throat tightening, "this is your wedding day. Can we not talk about this now?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, that same cold gleam Vanessa used to get when she thought she had the upper hand. "Dad, you said we'd talk about it after the honeymoon. That's not going to work. Either you sign the transfer paperwork for the beach house now, or I'm walking down the aisle with Robert. Your choice." My first instinct was to laugh, just laugh and shake my head, because how do you even respond to that level of emotional blackmail? But I didn't laugh. I just stood there, frozen, my hands clenched at my sides, heart pounding. This wasn't just about property. This wasn't about real estate. It was about respect, about being reduced to a transaction in the very moment I was supposed to be honored as her father. "You're really doing this?" I asked, my voice quiet. "You're giving me an ultimatum on your wedding day?" She looked down, then back up. No hesitation. "It's just business, Dad. You always told me to make bold moves. I learned from the best." That stung more than anything. The fact that she thought this manipulation was some sort of strategy, a power play she learned from me. If that were true, then I had failed her in ways I never anticipated. I stepped back and let out a slow breath. The silence between us deepened, heavy like storm clouds. For a moment, she looked uncertain, as if waiting for me to cave. As if she believed that the fear of public embarrassment, of being seen as the absent father, would make me fold. I looked her square in the eye and said, "Then have him walk you. Good luck." And with that, I turned and walked out of the room, my feet moving faster with each step. The corridor outside was lined with flowers and whispers. I passed a few guests who smiled awkwardly, unaware that something seismic had just shifted in the other room. I didn't stop to explain. I walked out the front doors and into the sunlight, the sounds of violins fading behind me. I sat in my car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the chapel entrance through the windshield. People began filing in, dressed in pastel linen and floral dresses, all completely unaware of what had just taken place upstairs. I watched as Robert, slick in his tailored suit, greeted guests, shook hands, kissed cheeks. Then, 10 minutes later, I saw Claire emerge, radiant in white, her arm looped through his as they prepared to walk down the aisle together. He looked smug. She looked determined. And me? I felt hollow. Not angry. Not even sad, really. Just empty. Like something sacred had been taken and I hadn't fought hard enough to protect it. The ceremony went on without me. I heard about it later from friends who attended. How beautiful it was. How stunning Claire looked. How odd it was that I wasn't there to walk her down. The excuses were varied. He got sick. Family emergency. He didn't want to take attention away from the couple. But I didn't bother correcting anyone. Let them wonder. Let them whisper. I knew the truth, and so did she. That was enough. I drove home that afternoon, pulled into my driveway, and sat in the car until the sky turned pink. Then I walked inside, poured a scotch, and stared at the signed but undelivered honeymoon itinerary sitting on the kitchen counter. The next morning, I made the calls. First to the travel agency. Canceled the honeymoon. Full refund, no explanation. Then to my company's board. Scheduled an emergency meeting. When the time came, I walked into the conference room and informed them that Claire was no longer CEO. No big speech. No drama. Just a formal transition back into my control, effective immediately. Some board members looked relieved. Others stayed silent. One, a longtime friend, approached me afterward and said, "It's about time." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know how long people had been biting their tongues about her leadership, or how much of that silence was aimed at protecting me, not her. Over the following days, the fallout began. Vanessa called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail dripping with faux concern. I heard what happened. "I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding. Don't do anything rash." Then came the text from extended family. "Are you okay? Why weren't you at the wedding?" Claire seemed heartbroken. I ignored them all. If people wanted the truth, they could ask Claire. Let her explain why her father wasn't there. Let her admit what she tried to pull. The silence on my end wasn't bitterness. It was boundary. A new kind I was learning to hold, even if it hurt. A week later, Claire emailed. No apology. Just questions. Why did you cancel the honeymoon? Why did you remove me as CEO? Can we talk? I didn't respond. I wasn't ready. I wasn't sure I ever would be. But I knew one thing for certain. Something irreversible had happened in that bridal suite. And even if we found a way back to each other, it would never be the same again. I always thought cutting someone off would feel louder, like slamming a door or yelling in finality before walking away. But the truth is, the first real act of detachment felt quiet, eerily so. I sat at my desk with the blinds drawn halfway, light streaking across the hardwood like prison bars, and opened my laptop. I logged into the travel agency's portal where I'd booked Claire and Austin's $18,000 honeymoon package. Overwater bungalows. Private chef dinners. First-class flights. I stared at the itinerary, remembering how excited she'd been when I surprised her with the confirmation email 2 months earlier. "Dad, you didn't have to," she'd said, her voice catching just enough to make me believe she was still my little girl. That memory made my jaw clench. I clicked cancel reservation and waited for the confirmation email. It arrived in seconds. That was it. No drama. No screams. Just silence and a balance refund on my credit card. It felt surgical, precise, like removing a tumor before it could spread any further. The next move wasn't as clean. Recalling the emergency board meeting, I took my time, less out of hesitation, more out of clarity. I didn't want this decision to be fueled by rage. I wanted it anchored in principle. Claire had used her position at the company like a status symbol. She didn't lead. She delegated to the point of detachment. She showed up late to key meetings, spent more time on branding photo shoots than logistics operations, and allowed her husband to consult on vendor deals. That last one rubbed me raw. I found out he'd been emailing vendors using a company signature even though he was never formally employed. A few had even forwarded me messages asking if Austin was authorized to negotiate terms. That alone could have gotten her fired anywhere else. But here she was, using my name, my legacy, as her leverage. Until now, I stood at the head of the conference table while everyone settled in. It was the same room where I'd first announced Claire as CEO 2 years ago. I remember how proud she looked back then, dressed in a navy blazer and heels too high for comfort, grinning like she'd won the lottery. I'd given a heartfelt speech about passing the torch, about legacy and the future. I hadn't known then that I was lighting a match under my own company's foundation. That morning, I didn't offer a speech. I simply stated that effective immediately, Claire was being relieved of her position and would no longer hold executive authority in the company. I named our CFO as acting CEO until we finalized a replacement. I expected protest. Instead, there was a strange sense of relief in the room, as if everyone had been holding their breath since she took over. That silence told me everything I needed to know about how far she drifted and how long people had been watching me let it happen. Word traveled fast, as it always does in companies where gossip simmers just beneath professionalism. Within 24 hours, I received 2 anonymous emails thanking me for doing what needed to be done. One person wrote, "It's your company, sir. It always was. We were waiting for you to take it back." Another email had just 2 words, "Welcome back." I wish I could say those messages filled me with pride or satisfaction, but instead, they left me hollow. This wasn't a victory. It was a correction. And like all corrections, it came too late to be clean. What bothered me more than anything was realizing just how long I'd been asleep at the wheel, too afraid of confrontation, too desperate to keep my daughter close, even if it meant letting her steer us into a ditch. That weekend, I turned off my phone and drove to the beach house. The place felt like a time capsule, untouched since the last time Claire and I spent a weekend there when she was still in college. Her old surfboard still leaned against the shed. A pair of flip-flops with faded straps sat by the back door. I stepped onto the deck, stared out at the endless blue, and tried to breathe. For years, this place had been the backdrop of our best memories. I taught her to swim here, to fish, to ride the little waves without fear. Now it was the center of a power play. A pawn in a chess game I never agreed to play. I ran my hand along the railing and said out loud, "You're not for sale." Not to her. Not to Vanessa. Not to anyone. Over the next few days, the fallout started to ripple. Vanessa sent a series of emails, progressively more condescending. First it was faux concern. I heard Claire's position was adjusted. I hope this wasn't over a misunderstanding. Then came the guilt trips. "She's your daughter. I can't believe you'd sabotage her future like this." And finally, the threats. "People are talking. You're damaging your reputation, not hers." I didn't respond to any of them. She was spinning, desperate to regain control, and every silence from me seemed to drive her deeper into frenzy. I expected Claire to reach out too, but she didn't. Not immediately. That part surprised me. For someone who'd been bold enough to issue ultimatums, her sudden silence was deafening. 2 weeks passed. Then came the first message from a blocked number. It was short, just one line. "I didn't think you'd actually do it." I stared at the screen for a long time before locking it and placing it face down on the table. That night, I poured myself a drink and sat on the couch in my home office, replaying everything. The ultimatum, the wedding walk, the empty seat that should have been mine. Part of me still wanted to believe she was just influenced, poisoned by Vanessa's manipulations. But another part, the quieter, more truthful part, whispered, she made her choice. And I made mine. The company began to recover, slowly but noticeably. Morale improved. Communication between departments strengthened. We brought in a new marketing consultant who actually listened instead of posturing for LinkedIn Cloud. Claire's absence created space for growth. And for the first time in years, I felt proud walking through the office. But outside of work, the ache lingered. No matter how rational the decisions were, no matter how justified, I still had moments where I'd look at old photos, her 5th birthday, her college graduation, and wonder, how did we get here? The answer, of course, wasn't a single moment. It was a collection of choices, of silences, of indulgences I mistook for love. I had raised her to believe she was special, but somewhere along the line, she translated that into entitlement. And I had let it happen. That realization didn't come with a wave of shame, just clarity. And with clarity came resolve. This bridge wasn't just burned. It was lit with intention. And now, I had to learn how to live on the other side. The months that followed felt like walking through an empty house after everyone's moved out, silent, echoing, filled with fragments of something that used to feel like home. The calls stopped. The texts stopped. Even the gossip, which once buzzed like white noise around me, started to die down. No more questions about the wedding. No more half-hearted interventions from relatives trying to patch things up. It was just me now. Me, the office, the beach house, and an ever-present quiet that I had no choice but to make peace with. I thought the hardest part would be cutting her off. But it turns out, what really haunts you is the absence. Not her voice, not her laugh, not even her presence, but the knowledge that she was out there, hurting maybe, angry maybe, and choosing not to speak to me. And I, in turn, was choosing not to chase her. Some nights I'd pour a drink and sit in the living room with nothing but the sound of the ice clinking in my glass and the creak of the ceiling fan turning above me. I didn't have the energy to watch TV. I couldn't stomach the noise of it. I'd stare at the family photos still up on the mantle. Me, Claire, and Vanessa on a ski trip back when things were still held together by pretense and polite smiles. One picture in particular caught my eye more often than the rest. Claire was maybe 10, bundled in a red snow jacket, holding up a snowball like she was about to launch it at the camera. I was mid-laugh. Vanessa had her arm around my waist. We looked happy, and maybe we were, for that one frame, that one fleeting moment. I often wondered if Claire remembered that day as fondly as I did, or if it had already been overwritten by the years of silent resentment that followed. At work, the company settled into a rhythm again. No more drama, no more passive-aggressive memos, no more urgent meetings about branding strategies that were nothing more than Claire flexing her title. The new interim CEO, Shannon, a woman who'd been with us since the early days, brought a calm, grounded energy to the team. She wasn't flashy, but she got things done. Our numbers improved. Vendor relationships smoothed out. Employees stopped whispering when I walked down the hall. It was progress, but it was progress tinged with bitterness, because every step forward reminded me that my daughter had been holding us back, that she hadn't been ready, that I had handed her something sacred before she knew how to treat it. Every so often, I'd hear small updates. One of the junior managers mentioned seeing Claire at a networking event, saying she looked tired, a little withdrawn. Another said Austin had pitched a startup idea to investors and been politely ignored. Then came word that they were living in a much smaller apartment, no longer in the luxury high-rise I'd paid the deposit on as a wedding gift. Apparently, they'd let the lease expire and moved into a more manageable unit across town. There were rumors about Claire looking for work, but nothing concrete. I never asked for details. I just listened, nodded, and moved on. But deep down, I couldn't help but feel the tight coil of something between vindication and grief. One day in late April, I stopped by the beach house for the first time in weeks. It was quiet as always, the kind of quiet that used to soothe me but now made my chest feel heavy. I stepped inside, opened all the windows, and let the ocean air sweep through the rooms like a reset button. I wandered from room to room, touching old furniture, flipping through a dusty photo album we used to keep on the coffee table. There was a picture of Claire and me sitting on the deck, her feet in my lap, a popsicle melting down her hand. She couldn't have been older than 6. That memory, the way she laughed, the way she'd yelled, "No boys allowed," at the seagulls, hit me like a gut punch. I sank into the couch, elbows on my knees, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for months. I was still there, sitting in that same spot, when I got the text. It was from an unknown number, but I knew immediately it was her. "Can we talk?" That was it. No punctuation, no apology, just a quiet plea. I didn't respond right away. I stared at it like it was a trap, as if replying would suddenly undo everything that had led us here. I closed the message and put the phone face down. I didn't trust it. Not yet. But that night, as I lay in bed, the message burned in my thoughts. I wasn't sure what I wanted from her. An apology? A breakdown? Some explanation that made her betrayal make sense? Or maybe I didn't want anything at all. Maybe I just needed to see her crack, to admit, finally, that what she did wasn't bold. It was cruel. It took her a week to reach back out. This time, it was a voicemail. I was at work when it came in. The notification sat there on my screen all day, untouched. I finally listened to it after everyone had gone home. Her voice was shaky, raw. "Hi, Dad. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. And I get why you're not answering. I don't know how to fix it. But I want to try. Please let me try." I sat at my desk in the dark, her voice echoing through the office speakers, and felt something twist in my chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the faintest flicker of something resembling hope. The damage was done. The bridge had burned. But maybe, just maybe, there was still something left in the ashes. I didn't call her back that night. I didn't text. I didn't reach for her the way I once would have. I needed time. I needed space. I needed her to sit with the silence a little longer. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel like I was carrying a corpse on my back. I felt like something had shifted. Like the silence was no longer a wall, but a pause. And in that pause, maybe, there was room to rebuild. On new terms. On my terms. The moment she stepped into the lobby, everything slowed. I was standing at the far end of the office floor, speaking with Shannon about vendor timelines, when I caught a glimpse of Claire through the glass doors, shoulders drawn, hair pulled back into a messy bun, no trace of the polish and poise she used to wield like armor. She didn't see me at first. Her eyes scanned the space nervously, like she was searching for an exit even while trying to enter. Shannon followed my gaze, her expression unreadable, but respectful. She nodded and stepped away without a word. I walked slowly toward the front, every step feeling like it had weight, like the past 7 months were clinging to my ankles. When I reached the lobby, Claire looked up, and for the first time in years, she didn't smile like she was about to sell me something. She just looked tired. Human. Can we talk? She asked softly, her voice cracking on the last word. I nodded and led her to the conference room at the end of the hallway. It was empty, quiet, the blinds half drawn like they always were in the afternoons. I didn't say anything at first. I let her walk in and sit down across from me. The same table where I'd once handed her the CEO title. The same place I took it back. She looked around like she was afraid of being watched, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her purse. I wasn't sure if you'd even let me in, she said, trying to sound casual, but her voice betrayed her. I sat down, leaned back in the chair, and studied her face. Thinner, paler, eyes sunken with the kind of regret that sleep doesn't fix. You've been quiet, I said, not as an accusation but a fact. She nodded, biting her lower lip. Yeah, I didn't know what to say. I still don't really. The silence stretched between us like a tightrope, and neither of us wanted to be the first to walk across. Eventually, she sighed and looked down at her hands. Mom told me you'd come around eventually. That you were just angry. That you'd cave. She paused, blinked hard. But you didn't. You really didn't. I didn't respond. I just let her sit with her own words. She swallowed hard. I thought I was making a power move. I thought if I pushed you, you'd give in. You always did before. Her voice cracked then, the emotion finally catching up. I didn't think you'd actually walk away. I didn't think you'd miss the wedding. I didn't think you'd fire me. I thought you loved me too much to let me go. That line hit harder than I expected, not because it wasn't true, but because it was. I had loved her too much to let her fail. Too much to let her struggle. Too much to let her face consequences. And in doing so, I had raised a daughter who thought love was synonymous with surrender. I do love you, I said quietly. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's enabling. And I did that for too long. Claire looked up at me then, her eyes wide, glassy, filled with a cocktail of shame and realization. I know, she whispered. I see it now. I see what I did. I let Mom fill my head with ideas. I let Austin talk me into thinking we deserved more. That we could outmaneuver you. That you were just a stepping stone. And the worst part is, I believed it. I treated you like an obstacle, not a father. She started to cry then, not the silent, dignified tears she used to shed when things didn't go her way, but full, shoulder-shaking sobs that made her body curl in on itself. I stayed seated, hands clasped in front of me, my own throat tightening. I wanted to reach for her, to console her, but I didn't move. Not yet. Some moments had to burn to be remembered. She wiped her face with her sleeve and laughed bitterly through her tears. We lost the apartment. Austin's business tanked. I've been interviewing for jobs I'm not qualified for because my only experience was writing on your name. And Mom, she's gone cold. Barely returns my calls now that I'm not the golden girl. I nodded slowly, not with triumph, but with the resigned understanding that some lessons only come when the world stops protecting you. That's how she operates, I said. She loves the version of you that serves her, not the one who struggles. Claire let out a shaky breath. I was so stupid. I burned everything down thinking I was building something better. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I miss you, Dad. I miss being your daughter. That broke something in me, not in a destructive way, but in the sense that something long frozen finally cracked open. I stood then, walked to the window, and stared out at the parking lot below. Cars moved slowly, unaware of the reckoning unfolding behind the glass. I'm not going to give you back the CEO position, I said, turning back to face her. She nodded quickly, almost desperately. I know. I don't expect that. I don't deserve it. But I'm willing to give you a job, I continued. Not out of pity, not out of guilt, but because you're asking, not demanding. You'll start where everyone else starts. No title, no corner office, no special treatment. Her lips parted slightly in surprise, and then she nodded again. That's more than fair. I walked back to my seat and sat across from her. And Claire, let's be clear, this is about work. Our relationship as father and daughter, that's going to take time. Trust doesn't rebuild in one meeting. She looked down, took a deep breath, and nodded. I'll earn it, she said. Both the job and your trust. I promise. I studied her for a moment longer, trying to reconcile the broken, remorseful woman in front of me with the one who had once stood in a bridal suite and demanded a beach house. Maybe both versions were true. Maybe that's what growing up really was. Facing the worst parts of yourself and still showing up the next day to try again. All right, I said quietly. You start Monday. Her face crumpled into a tearful smile. She stood, hesitated, then asked, Can I hug you? I hesitated just a second too long before nodding. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me, not as a daughter asking for something, but as someone grateful for whatever I was still willing to give. She showed up on Monday in slacks and a plain white blouse, holding a beat-up leather notebook and a look in her eyes I hadn't seen since she was a teenager asking for her first summer job. There was no makeup, no designer handbag, no sense of entitlement shadowing her posture. Just a quiet, almost fearful determination. I watched her from my office window as she took her seat among the other employees. Cubicles, not offices, and accepted the onboarding packet from HR like she wasn't the same person who once strutted through those halls with Theo stitched onto her ego. That alone told me something had shifted. Whether it would last, I didn't know. But I was willing to watch. I was willing to wait. Because people don't change overnight, but they do change when the ground underneath them stops bending to their every whim. At first, the others didn't quite know what to make of her. A few coworkers kept their distance, unsure if she was a spy or if the whole thing was some twisted performance. But time has a way of clarifying things. She started small, data entry, client calls, managing schedules. I made sure her supervisors treated her no differently than anyone else. No special projects. No fast tracks. No whispers behind closed doors. Just work. Real work. And to her credit, she never once complained. Not to me. Not to anyone. I asked Shannon once, about 2 weeks in, how Claire was adjusting. She shrugged and said, She's quiet. But she shows up early, stays late. Honestly, she's more useful now than when she had an office. At home, things remained different. We weren't back to weekend lunches or text chains of inside jokes. But the distance between us was no longer jagged. It was just measured. We'd exchange nods in the hallway, short conversations over printer issues, or occasional updates about projects she was working on. And every so often, there'd be a look, a flash in her eyes, that said thank you in a language words couldn't carry. It wasn't warmth yet, but it was something close to safety, something grounded. And I realized that maybe the foundation we were building now, slowly and painfully, was more honest than anything we'd shared in years. Not built on gifts or guilt, just presence. 3 months into her new role, I caught her in the break room, laughing with a few junior staff over some silly spreadsheet error. I stood outside the doorway, just listening. Her laugh was softer now, less performative, less sharp around the edges. It was a small thing, but it struck me how different she sounded. Like someone who had learned what it meant to be humbled and hadn't shattered under it. When she noticed me, her smile faltered, but she didn't retreat. She just nodded respectfully and turned back to the coffee machine. That tiny interaction told me more than any apology ever could. She was doing the work, not just professionally, but personally. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for her to slip up. I was just letting her be. One Sunday, months after she'd returned, we met at the beach house. Not planned, just coincidence. I had driven down to check on a plumbing issue. She said she'd come by to visit the old place. She brought a small bag of groceries, eggs, bread, and strawberries, and offered to make French toast. I almost declined out of habit, but something stopped me. We moved around the kitchen like coworkers instead of kin, carefully polite, speaking only when necessary. But when we sat on the deck, plates in our laps, the silence wasn't heavy. It was calm. The sun hung low over the water, and the breeze carried the smell of salt and seaweed. It felt like the first breath after a long-held exhale. Claire looked out at the waves and said, "I was wrong. About everything. About you. About what mattered." She didn't look at me when she said it. She just watched the water, her voice steady. I wanted so badly to win, to prove I could take what I thought was mine. But I didn't earn any of it. Not the job, not the respect, not the right to ask for more. She paused, then added, "I know I hurt you. I don't expect things to go back to what they were. I want to know you still see me, not as your mistake, but as your daughter. Flawed, learning, still here." I didn't respond right away. I looked at her, not just at her words, but at her face, her posture, the way her hands gripped her plate like she was bracing for disappointment. And I saw her, not the version I tried to mold, not the CEO I installed out of guilt, not the bride who betrayed me. Just Claire, my daughter, human, humbled, trying. And that was enough. "I see you," I said quietly, "but the beach house still isn't yours." That made her laugh, short, surprised, a little relieved. "Fair," she said. And in that moment, it felt like we were finally sitting on equal ground. We finished our meal in peace. No grand revelations. No teary confessions. Just a shared space that didn't belong to the past anymore. When she left, she hugged me, briefly, gently, and I didn't flinch. I watched her walk to her car, shoulders no longer hunched in shame, and felt something inside me settle. Not closure, exactly, but something like contentment. Later that night, I sat on the deck with a drink in hand, the sky painted in streaks of purple and gold. The ocean whispered its endless rhythm below. I thought about the man I was a year ago, blindly generous, emotionally tangled, unable to say no to the child he loved too much to discipline. And I thought about the man I was now, clearer, sharper, still learning. Claire hadn't come back to me as the daughter I lost. She came back as someone new. And so did I. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you love just to protect yourself? Sometimes, the hardest boundaries are the ones we draw with family. Tell me, would you have made the same choices I did, or handled it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's talk about what real accountability and redemption look like when blood isn't enough. And if this story hit home, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life family dramas that go deeper than surface apologies.